Good morning. My name is Stavros Kavouras. I'm a professor at Arizona State University at the College of Health Solutions. Um, I'm thrilled to have Dr. Sallis here for his presentation. Um, Before we started, just to remind you, we have in the Q&A section, you can submit your questions that we will address them at the end. And also wanted to remind you that this is a series of seminars that we call the Water Talks. So the next speaker is going to be Professor Larry Armstrong. I will put the link in the chat in a few minutes, and that would be on October the 2nd on a Thursday. And then November the 5th, we'll have Nisa Chakurdian from the U.S. Research Institute of Environmental Medicine speaking on a Wednesday, November the 5th. So I will share those links in the future for to be able to register. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Sallis, who is a family medicine and sports medicine physician at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in California. He's a clinical professor of family medicine at both Kaiser Permanente Tyson School of Medicine and University of California at Riverside School of Medicine. Dr. Sallis is a past president of the American College of Sports Medicine, chief medical officer for the Los Angeles Football Club, and he's the lead primary care team physician for LA Clippers. And he's also the chair for the Ironman Sports Medicine Conference in Kona, Hawaii, that I think he's going to share some of his experience in that. So, Dr. Sallis, thank you for accepting this invitation. We're thrilled to have you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Stavros. Can everybody hear me okay? Sound good?
Yep.
Great, great. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, talk about something that I find very fascinating. And as Stavros mentioned, I've been involved with the Ironman triathlon on Kona, and so a lot of my experience will be based on that. And what I've seen there, as well as taking care of football players, soccer players over the years in hot environments, that, seeing a lot of problems related to heat and hydration. And especially during extreme endurance exercise like an Ironman, these kind of athletes are at high risk, especially with the conditions being very hot and humid as well. And in my experience, particularly flawed hydration plans as well as nutrition plans often underlie what we see in the medical tent. And these are simple mistakes that can be corrected to allow athletes to participate at a higher level and certainly avoid significant injuries. And athletes really need to strive to match their fluid, their fuel, their salt intakes with what they're losing. And so a little bit of planning can go a long way for these athletes. Now, if you're interested in learning about this stuff in more detail, every year before the Ironman race in Kona, I put on a sports medicine conference. The dates this year, it's coming up in a couple weeks, October 5th through 9th. We started on the Sunday. The Ironman race is the following Saturday. And most of these individuals stay and work in the medical tent. And we need some non-medical volunteers as well. I invite a faculty of some of the top people in the world, both nationally and internationally, and typically have some researchers as well as very experienced clinicians. So just give you an overview of what I want to cover today. Kind of want to review the recommendations for optimal fluid intake and how you can gauge that. I think it might be interesting to illustrate some of the common conditions that we see in the medical tent related to heat and hydration. And then talk a little bit about the evaluation and management of these problems. And then again, suggest that in most cases, avoidable errors can help prevent the issues occurring in these extreme endurance athletes. So what is optimal fluid intake? This is kind of a silly metric that Tim Noakes proposed, that there are two opposing groups. He was really of the camp of dehydrationists, that he didn't think humans needed a lot of fluid to compete optimally, which I think we all know is wrong. And then on the other hand, he kind of created a straw man of dipsomaniacs, he called them, where people were pushing to drink as much as tolerable. And so, it's really, obviously, it's a balance. And I think we all understand that everybody has a different need for hydration. No two athletes sweat the same amount. or the same concentration of sodium. So they really need to try to optimize and drink to replace their sweat loss. And so I really stress to my endurance athletes that I take care of that they got to learn their sweat rate. They need to weigh themselves nude before a workout, after an hour workout, in the type of environmental conditions and what they're going to be doing, whether it's running or riding the bike. They need to weigh themselves nude again after an hour workout. And the difference is a good estimate of how much fluid they need to replace. So obviously, for every pound you lose, you want to try to, drink 16 ounces of fluid to replace that. And so, you need to start early. You don't want to get behind. So, 4 ounces, every 15 minutes is what you need if you're losing a pound an hour, roughly. Now, again, just to illustrate this variability, this comes from Bob Murray at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. Look at the extreme variability in sweat rates of different types of athletes. Mia Hamm barely sweated when she was playing, barely would sweat at all. I mean, so she could easily just say, I'm going to drink to thirst. I'm going to drink occasionally in a 2.5 hour soccer game. She's not going to lose enough to cause problems. When you start to look at guys like Chris Lee, who I took care of in the Ironman Medical Center, I'm going to talk about him more later. He sweats at about 2 liters per hour. And look at Adam Kennedy, a professional tennis player, 5 liters per hour. That was the heaviest sweater they tested at the lab at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. If Adam doesn't start, if he waits 15 minutes to start drinking, he's a liter or so behind already. So it's imperative that these athletes drink on a schedule in order to optimize their performance. Now, that wasn't always known. I think it's fascinating to go through the ages in some of these top endurance athletes and what they believed and what they did. And this is a picture here of Jim Peters, who back in the 50s held the 4 fastest marathon times. And when he was interviewed about how he managed hydration, this was his comment. In the marathon race, there's no need to take any solid food at all, and every effort should be made to do without liquid. As the moment food or drink is taken, some discomfort will almost invariably be felt. Now, Peters was one of the top marathon runners of his time, and he was skilled enough and fit enough that he could get by, following this kind of regimen. And that all kind of collapsed on him in 1954 at the Empire Games in Vancouver, Canada, when the temperature on race day was a scorching 86 degrees. And by all accounts, Peters was off to an amazing start, ran at a torrid pace. As it was his custom, he took no water. He entered the stadium actually with a 3-mile lead and succumbed to heat stroke and failed to complete the last lap. Now, check out this video, what is really a classic, one of the first videos I can find of an athlete suffering with heat stroke, and listen to Peter's comments when he was interviewed about it.
Finished, if they'd let me just gone round the corner. We can have a look again at this now, Jim. Just talk me through this. You see here, you look to me absolutely on your last legs. Yes, but what I'm trying to do there, though, Harry, is to make for the right-hand side of the track where the big stand is, you see, because then the sun was out. And, but I mean, do you really know what you're doing at this stage? You look to me as though you're unconscious. Yes, now here's Mickey Mays, the late Mickey Mays, going to grab me, you see. Now, that is precisely 180 yards from where the finish was meant to be. And I knew I'd got to go round there, even at that moment. And I can remember Mickey saying, well done, Jim. And then, of course, I passed out. But you look to me, if I may say so, as though you've already passed out before he even gets to you. I was very fit, though, Harry, and very determined. And I knew that I hadn't broken the tape, and I would...
Well, the problem was he wasn't drinking enough water. And what he's referring to is they had actually mismarked the course. And the finish line was actually 180 yards farther than it should have been, and so he should have actually been able to cross it before he started collapsing. But interesting how he felt, I'm very fit, and I was trying to go to the shady side of the where the stands were, and so it was just fascinating. Now this sort of belief in not drinking water continued into the 60s, and this is Tommy Simpson, the British cycling champion, one of the first to wear the yellow jerseys, first Brit to wear the yellow jerseys in the Tour de France back in 1965, and this was his comment on how he approached hydration during races such as the Tour de France. And he said, drink as little as possible. And with the liquid not too cold. It is only a question of willpower. When you drink too much, you will perspire and lose your strength. 4 small bottles for a long stage on the tour. It is frowned upon to drink more. Now, again, you had a guy as talented as Tommy Simpson. He could get away with just crazy advice, not drinking, and we all know we know the colder when it's cold, we absorb more. So much we didn't know about them. But take a look at Tommy Simpson in the Tour de France, 1967, in a climb up the famous Mount Ventoux in what's described as cauldron-like heat. And listen to the commentary here.
He was known as a regular user of amphetamines. When he got to the higher part of the mountain, he started to wobble. He began to zigzag across the road, and at a certain point, about a mile and a half from the top of the mountain, he keeled over into the rocks at the side of the road. On. He was the team leader. They had no option but to do what he wanted. He went on for a few more yards, keeled over, and that time he keeled over for good. They put him in a helicopter and flew him to the hospital in Avignon.
Tommy Simpson died on Mount Ventoux that day. And his last words were, "Put me back on my bike." And very famously, he kept going and going. This sort of indomitable will that we see in these endurance athletes can get him into trouble, serious trouble, and in this case, causing him to die. And he did have amphetamines, had been using amphetamines, is my understanding as well, which obviously affects his ability to tolerate the heat. And they've put a memorial to Tommy Simpson on Mount Ventoux, and you can see, I think the riders leave their water bottles there, sort of at a testament to some flawed hydration plans that perhaps cost him his life. Now, it's interesting if you look at the marathon, the number of people who did marathons, stretching back to the 1900s. This goes up to 2010, but you see a dramatic rise in the number of people competing in marathons in the early 1980s. And I think it's fascinating to sort of correlate that with when we finally started, first invented a sports drink, then began to, in 1975, ACSM developed their first fluid guidelines for fluid replacement. And boy, when we started to realize you needed to hydrate, how important it was, suddenly the average person could do a marathon. You didn't have to be Jim Peters and avoiding fluids. Now lots of people could do marathons, and I have to believe that understanding the importance of fluid to doing this had a big hand in that happening. Now, what we deal with in Kona very often is collapsing. Athletes collapsing on the course. It's sort of the signature injury of Ironman, really of most any endurance race. That at Ironman was made famous by Julie Moss in this collapse and crawl in the 1982 marathon. And it's interesting when you look, when you talk, this actually was shown on ABC's Wide World of Sports, which was then a very popular sports show. And you talk to a lot of these old triathletes, and they say, "I was so inspired when I saw Julie Moss crawling across that finish line. I knew I wanted to do Ironman." Well, that it didn't have that same effect on me. Actually, made me definitely not want to do it. But what we see almost invariably in these athletes who collapse, can't keep going, are problems with fluid and sodium balance. Often these are underlying the issues. Now, I would define collapse as the inability to walk unassisted, typically with exhaustion, but not necessarily nausea, vomiting, or cramping. The body temperature can be normal. It can be high, particularly with heat stroke, or it could even be low, especially in cool water triathlons or cool environment triathlons. I've seen athletes collapse with low body temperature. And for what I mean by collapse, I'm excluding an orthopedic condition. I'm not talking about an athlete who goes down because they sprain their ankle or they twist their knee. Now, in my experience, most of the cases of athletes who collapse are related to hydration errors. And obviously, you want to aim for being euhydrated or mildly dehydrated. And when you underdrink, though, and you get significantly dehydrated, you increase the risk of a host of conditions, including postural hypotension or so-called heat syncope or heat exhaustion, muscle cramping. We see cramps like you've never seen before in Kona. GI upset becomes to be more common, and then the most serious problem associated with underdrinking is heat stroke. When you look at athletes who overdrink, they can cause a fluid overload. They'll swell. The biggest concern is they dilute their sodium and they get an exercise-associated hyponatremia. And if they drink enough, we'll see them go into pulmonary edema. And often when they get out of the water, there's a condition called swimming-induced pulmonary edema. that we'll see athletes suffer with, where sometimes we have to give them Lasix, a medicine, a strong diuretic to get rid of the fluid. And we've seen cases of congestive heart failure. Typically, it's because they were given too much IV fluid. Now, here's a list of those conditions. I kind of want to just run through them each. These conditions associated with underdrinking. Dehydration is pretty ubiquitous. And, a little bit of dehydration, a couple, 2 to 3% is fine. And that's actually what's expected. If it's severe enough, when you start getting over 5%, 10%, you can have collapse just on the basis of reduced circulating blood volume. But what I see is people who are dehydrated, who have lost weight, significant weight during the race, it increases the risk and severity of all these other causes of collapse. And clinically, what I look for when they're in the medical tent, they ought to be thirsty if they're significantly dehydrated. Their mouth will be dry, their lips will be dry, they can't generate spit in their mouth. But the best indicator is they've lost weight. And we weigh all the athletes before they start the race. And then we weigh them again as soon as they come in the medical tent. And that difference is how much fluid they have lost. And when they've lost more than 5%, that's a significant amount. And they're going to have typically significant clinical symptoms, including an increase in heart rate, a decrease in blood pressure, a decrease in blood pressure, increase in heart rate. They'll have like sort of poor skin turgor. They lose the fluid in the skin and it'll almost tint when you pinch it. But the treatment for that is simple. We always start with oral hydration. And if they can't tolerate the fluids, or if they're more than 5%, typically I'm looking at putting an IV in this person to get them back to feeling better quickly. It's a lot of controversy around who should get IV fluids. We tend to be very liberal at Ironman. We use normal saline as our rehydration solution. And again, the clear indications are significant weight loss, 5% or more, and especially in those who can't take oral fluids. They're vomiting, they're very nauseated, they're feeling like they can take it. And sometimes I just have an athlete come in and say, listen, I've done this race 20 times, and if you give me a liter of fluid, I'm going to feel better instantly. I'll be able to go out to dinner tonight. If you don't, I'm going to feel crappy for a couple of days. It's hard to argue. The risks are very low. Now, the one big risk where you absolutely have to avoid IV fluids is if they've gained weight. If they're already fluid overloaded, I could throw them into congestive heart failure by giving them more IV fluids. So that's the one caveat. It's an absolute. And if they're hyponatremic, we want to be really cautious with giving IV fluids unless we can see that they are significantly dehydrated, because we do see some that have lost weight and are hyponatremic. Now, muscle cramps always thought of as a heat condition, but it's not necessarily. Heat makes them makes it more prone. But we see in people who swim the English Channel, one of the biggest problems they have is leg cramps, and it's 58 degrees in the water in the swimming the English Channel. But in an athletic competition in a hot, humid environment, typically cramps are related to overuse and muscle fatigue. And when you combine that with dehydration, sodium depletion, it increases the risk. The older you get, the higher the BMI, the less you stretch, the more hills and higher intensity you go. And as you get fatigued, those are all risk factors for muscle cramps, particularly lower leg, calf cramps. And we'll typically with those try ice, massaging, stretching, pulling the heel back with a calf cramp. Often when you see the cramps coming on, you put a tablespoon of salt in 8 ounces of a sports drink. That can often head off a cramp, and I use that a lot in my football players. We always see these cramping at the beginning of the season, and consuming, take 8 ounces of sports drink, a tablespoon of Gatorade, mix it up, have them drink it right away at the first sign of cramp can really help. Now, we use magnesium sulfate in the medical tent for these sort of total body crampers. You can see this fellow here. His legs are cramping, his calves, his thighs, his abdominal muscles, his fingers are cramping. I have never seen cramps in a football game like I see in Ironman triathletes. I mean, he's miserable. And these are the ones where often a little mag sulfate given very slowly or putting in an IV bag can really help mitigate these cramps. And we need to tell them to increase the salt intake early on. Obviously, they're not getting enough when they're cramping like this. Now, postural hypotension I referred to, often known as heat exhaustion or heat syncope. This is really not a true heat illness, but when you are dehydrated, you're exhausted from the heat, it makes it more common. Now, one of the hallmarks of postural hypotension is the collapse is going to occur after the finish line. Usually this is nothing serious, and it's related to blood pooling in the lower limbs and skin, and you lose this muscle pump action, sort of this what we call the second heart. With each stride you run, the muscles of of the thigh and calves contract, and they help pump that blood back centrally. Now, if you suddenly stop running, you lose the second heart, the blood pools in the lower extremities, you become lightheaded and keel over. And that's why it's so important after finishing an endurance race that you keep moving. You either keep walking or you lay down and put your legs up. Now, again, dehydration likely increases the risk, not mandatory, but there's no evidence. This is not a precursor to heat stroke. It's not like it proceeds neatly from cramping to heat exhaustion or postural hypotension to heat stroke. That's not a correlation. Temp is going to be less than 40, less than 104 degrees. When you lay them down, you put their legs up, their heart rate ought to quickly go back below 100. The blood pressure should come up above 100, systolic. And that's the treatment. Elevate the feet and pelvis 10 to 20 minutes, give them oral fluids. If they've lost a lot of weight, maybe an IV, and they recover very quickly from this. Now, this is the 1997 Ironman triathlon, one of the most dramatic near finishes in history. Chris Lee, you can see this is a very touched up video, because the original video, which I have, is much more dramatic, of him collapsing and melting down into the race.
Why push yourself so far that your mind and body can literally come apart? 4 p.m., October 18th, 1997. Chris Lee has covered 140 miles and can go no more. It's over just 50 feet from the finish line. It's cruel. And that's the deal.
But there was a lot more to the Chris Lee meltdown in 1997, and Chris related that he was not able to keep fluids down from the start of the bike. And at the time he collapsed, he was more about 100 yards from the finish line, but he was in 6th place. That's actually me in the picture of carrying him off. And when we got him in the medical tent, that's a picture of him down below. He was obtunded, bloated. You can barely recognize Chris in that picture. And Chris and I have become great friends, and he's fine with me talking about any of this. It's certainly nothing that he's concerned about sharing. But we gave him a couple, 2.5 liters of IV fluid in the med tent. Back then, all we had for nausea was Reglan, not the best thing. But after about 4 hours, Chris is such a tough guy. He said, "I'm fine. I want to go." We released him from the medical tent. He was tolerating oral fluids at the time. But then that night, he woke up with pretty severe abdominal pain. And over the next day, it became worse and worse. And then he was running a fever. He went to the emergency room in Kona. That night, the night after the race, they took him to surgery, and they found 16 centimeters of infarcted bowel. I mean, he had been shunting that blood away to the muscles so intensely, there wasn't enough blood flow to the gut. And Chris was consuming, he had the habit back then of eating a lot during the race, and you combine that with no blood flow. You can see him there. Look at the skin on his legs. You can see where he kept falling and cut up his legs from just not going. And so this exercise-induced GI distress, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, oftentimes it's bloody, very common in Ironman athletes. And we know that there are toxins released in the gut during extreme exercise that probably promote this, along with the intense diversion of blood away from the gut. And oftentimes it's precipitated by eating too much and the wrong things. And the end stage of this is bowel ischemia, and Chris is the most severe case that I've taken care of. Heat stroke, this is the true heat emergency that we absolutely cannot miss. And you look for a change in mental status. Often these athletes collapse. They may lose consciousness or an alteration in their level of consciousness. Oftentimes, what I refer to as mental stimulation, they're acting out inappropriately. They're jumpy, combative, angry, yelling at you. And when you combine that change in mental status with an elevation in rectal temperature above 40 degrees Celsius, that's how we diagnose heat stroke. You have to use a rectal temperature. You can't rely on an oral or an ear thermometer. They're just not accurate at that high level. And it's actually more common in shorter races, more common in marathons than an Ironman triathlon. When you're going really hard, in a hot, humid condition, we don't see these near as much as Ironman, although it seems like lately we've been seeing more of them. I'm going to show you a couple of cases. This is a classic, one of the first that was on national TV, the 1984 Women's Olympic Marathon.
Fortunately, less
Los
than
Angeles on a
100
very hot day.
meters to go now for Gabriela Anderson-Scheiss of Switzerland.
In 1954, they let Jim Peters struggle through this in Vancouver, and they said he was never the same again.
So Gabriela's temperature was 108, and you heard him refer to Jim Peters. They let him struggle through this in Vancouver at the Empire Games, and he was never the same again. Peters never really competed at a high level after his episode of heat stroke, nor did Gabriela Anderson-Scheiss. So that was one of the classic cases that we first really saw it on national TV, someone suffering with heat stroke. Her rectal temp was 108 degrees. They immediately cooled her appropriately, and she survived it, but it often takes its toll on you. Now, this is just a couple of years ago at the Women's Ironman World Championships in Kona, Hawaii, the finish line. Take a look at this case of...
There we go, Lolita, Rita, and Ironman, she's across the line, let's get her. Devin Long from Alice, Oregon, Devin. There we go, Devin. That's how you do it, Devin. Help her up. This is what we call Ironman, ladies and gentlemen. Look at that, Devin Bolt, helping men on Sudan.
So you can see the stretcher crew waiting to pick her up. She can't be helped by any medical personnel or she's disqualified. A fellow racer is allowed to help them, so that's what happened. But pretty dramatic. Again, she had 108 rectal temp, came down pretty quickly with cooling and did fine. But again, it just shows you the devastating effect that it can have on you when you're suffering with heat stroke. Now, the big risk factors are the environmental condition, especially humidity. The faster you're going, typically, the more at risk. And there's a great degree of individual susceptibility. And I put Corey Stringer's picture in here. He was the first heat stroke death in the NFL. And he every year would have trouble in the heat. We all believe, I think, that dehydration increases the risk, and certainly wearing something like football pads increases the risk as well. This is the 2004 Marine Corps Marathon, and this was a fascinating day. I worked in the medical tent on a very unseasonably hot day in late October when they hold the Marine Corps Marathon. They call it the People's Marathon. Lots of first-time marathoners, and I'll show you a clip of that day. We had, I think, 9 heat strokes with people coming in with over 40 degrees, 104 degrees rectal temp. And this is what they do. You can see the rectal temp there, 170.2, and they put them in an ice bath, pour it over them. And here's a clip. This is really a heat emergency.
What's going on? Get away! Watch out. That's 14, pulse 90. I had the jaw thrust. Hey, please!
So, if these aren't cooled immediately, they're going to die. If you take them to the emergency room, unlikely they're going to have a dunk tank to put them in. And that's a picture of Doug Casa there. Doug's done a lot of work on this when he came to Ironman. We didn't have these. We were just using ice packs. And so now we've used these dunk tanks, and they've been a real lifesaver for us. And again, the altered level of consciousness, rectal temp above 40 Celsius, that's diagnostic, and they'll have typically elevated heart rate, decrease in blood pressure. They need active cooling. You need to put them in anywhere at 5, 10, 15 minutes. When the temp goes down below 102, typically when we take them out, or if they start shivering, that's usually a sign they're ready to come out of the water. Now let's shift gears and talk about collapse when you've been over drinking. And you'll notice swelling in the hands and feet, which isn't a big deal, can make it a little uncomfortable for riding the bike. But the biggest risk is hyponatremia of exercise. And again, pulmonary edema, swimming-induced pulmonary edema we'll see, and then congestive heart failure when it's serious enough. Now, I think we don't appreciate how dangerous drinking too much water can be. On the opposite hand, as bad as dehydration in these extreme endurance athletes, but drinking too much can kill you, and you've got to be careful with. And this was illustrated in an awful fashion back in January of 2007 when these crazy DJs at a Sacramento radio station decided to have a contest, hold your Wii for a Wii, a Nintendo Wii. The idea was, let's drink. We're going to have people come into the studio, drink as much as they can. The last one to have to pee is going to win a Nintendo Wii. And right away, a nurse called in and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And listen to the on-air commentary.
Eva?
Yes.
What do you want to say?
I want to say that that those people that are drinking all that water can get sick and possibly die from water intoxication.
Yeah, we're aware of that.
They sign releases, so we're not responsible. It's okay.
And if they get to the point where they have to throw up, then they're going to throw up and they're out of the contest before they die. So that's good, right?
Oh, that's me. I suppose so.
Yeah. All right. How come you guys didn't do it?
Thanks for looking out, though. We don't want to die.
Oh, okay. Let me ask Carter if anybody's dying.
We ain't dying.
Hey, Carter, is anybody dying in there?
We got a guy that's just about to die. Oh, good. Make sure you sign
I like that we laugh at that. Yeah.
Make sure he signs the release.
Get the insurance on that,
Well, they were too
please.
dumb to know that someone was about to die, and her name was Jennifer Strange. She was a 28-year-old mother of 3 who entered this stupid contest trying to win a Nintendo Wii for her kids, and she drank nearly a gallon of water. She was the second to the last one, I think, that finally had to pee. And take a look when they interviewed her after she had left the competition.
Hello.
Jennifer, I heard that you're not doing too well.
My head hurts. Oh. They keep telling me that it's the water, that it'll tell my head to hurt and then it'll make me puke. But
who told you that? The intern?
Yeah.
That's what I noticed over there.
Like it hurts, but it makes you feel lightheaded. So I'm not sure if I'm just like.
This is what it feels like when you're drowning. There's a lot of water inside of you.
Oh, it hurts.
This is like deep blue sea. So we want to get you out of your misery.
So what was happening is her brain was swelling because of the low sodium. She had diluted out her sodium. The water goes across the blood-brain barrier, raises intracranial pressure, and eventually she died of a brainstem herniation, was found dead several hours later at home. So absolutely stupid. But this is what can happen when you drink too much water. And we have seen this at Ironman, amazingly enough. You know, when you replace hypertonic sweat with a hypotonic fluid, especially just plain water, all those sports drinks are relatively hyponatremic as well. And it's more common in long endurance races in hot, humid conditions, and especially later in the race when the temperature drops and people keep drinking, even though they aren't losing so much. Now, typically, we assume hyponatremia when someone has an altered level of consciousness and their temperature is normal, below 104, their blood pressure, heart rate are normal. Those are what the findings we'll see. Now, typically, the symptoms correlate with the sodium level, but not always. There's a lot of variability. The normal sodium in the blood should be 135 to 145. And as long as you're above 130, there's usually minimal symptoms. But once you start to go below 130, you begin to see malaise, nausea, headache. They become fatigued. And if it gets bad, as the brain begins to swell, they'll become confused. Now, typically, all of this goes away when they pee. They'll pass a dilute urine, and everything gets better. Now, when you get below about 125 or so, you begin to see brain swelling, coma, seizures, and death, even due to brainstem herniation. And often you'll see these athletes exhibit what I've referred to as phantom running, where they just seem to keep running a race. They're sort of they're not really conscious of what's going on, and their feet just keep moving. I've seen this, number of times in people with significant hyponatremia. Now, this really came to national attention in 2002 when there were 2 marathon deaths prominently in the Boston Marathon, the Marine Corps Marathon. Both of these women were running. They fit a classic pattern. They were running for something bigger than themselves. Cynthia Lucero was trying to run for a friend who had HIV, I believe, and there was she collected a lot of money, felt a lot of pressure to finish the race. Hillary Bellamy was running for breast cancer, same kind of a thing. They were novice marathon runners pushing themselves because they didn't want to let people down, pushing beyond probably what they should have done, and they paid the ultimate price for it. Now, with hyponatremia, The big risk factor is drinking too much and starting before the race. You're not a camel, you can't preload. And we typically more commonly see it in females and in slower runners, again, especially those who are finishing an Ironman in the dark and drinking and walking the marathon in the dark and drinking at every aid station. We also know that salty sweaters more at risk. We can see the difference in some people in their black shorts. You see the salt caked. There's a wide variation in how much salt people lose. We also, it's been postulated that perhaps there's a subclinical cystic fibrosis could be a factor. And this is Lisa Bentley, one of the great pro triathletes from Canada who had a mild case of cystic fibrosis. And every year she would struggle with hyponatremia, but she was very smart and was able to, with gels and salt tablets, be able to manage it and keep her sodium in a reasonable range and compete at Ironman. Now, again, we assume hyponatremia if the vitals are normal, but they have an altered level of consciousness. The first thing we want to do is check a serum sodium. Often their fingers will feel swollen, their wrists will be swollen, their wristband or watch will be tighter. And we just need to put them in a chair, elevate their feet. They're fluid overloaded. We want to just allow the kidneys to catch up. What they are suffering from is a syndrome of inappropriate ADH, the antidiuretic hormone. Normally, that should be suppressed when you are fluid overloaded. But for whatever reason, we believe it's from the pain, the shunting of blood. The ADH gets inappropriately released and causes the athlete to hold on to fluid. But almost universally, if you give them some time, 30, 40 minutes, an hour, they will pass a dilute amount of urine and be fine. We'll give them typically when it's low and they're symptomatic. If they're symptomatic and it's below 130, usually it's around the 125 range. We'll run in 100 cc's of hypertonic saline, 3% saline, and we sometimes have to repeat this a number of times as long as they're symptomatic until they get up to P and then feel much better. Now, this is the kind of evaluation we run through this athlete's collapse. I want to get their vital signs. I want to check their temp, first of all, rule out heat stroke, blood pressure, heart rate. Do they need ACLS? We have sudden cardiac arrests on the course. We have seizures, things like that. Do we need to start ACLS because their vital signs are unstable? The level of consciousness is the most important thing. If they're not alert talking to me, I'm very worried that something more serious is going on. Where the collapse occurred on the race course is very prognostic. Again, I talked about the postural hypotension. Those are easy to spot. They finish the race, stand there, keel over. Sometimes they convulse, they can look serious, but I'm much reassured if they collapse after the finish line. It's the ones, like you saw, crawling to the finish line, Chris Lee sprinting towards the finish line, they suddenly collapse. Those are the ones you need to worry about. Important history questions to ask: how much have you been drinking? What type of fluid have you been drinking? Have you passed any urine? Keep in mind, severe dehydration, you won't pass urine, but so can fluid overload with hyponatremia. If they've been vomiting, they have diarrhea, obviously they're going to be more likely to be dehydrated. Are they drinking enough stuff with carbohydrate? Are they taking in carbohydrate? That can make them feel very poorly, like they want to die when they get hypoglycemic. Any recent illnesses or medications, or the race preparation, have they been running enough to get them through and prepare for this race? On examination, then, I want to check their level of consciousness, their mental state. Are they interacting with me appropriately? Assess their state of hydration. The most thing is, have they lost weight or gained weight? That's my most important examination finding. If they're dry, they're going to be thirsty, their lips will be dry, they won't be able to spit. If they're overloaded, they're going to feel and look puffy. Their watch and their wristband will be tight. I want to check their heart rate, their blood pressure, both supine and erect. Look for orthostatic changes, significant drop in the blood pressure when they stand up. Keep in mind, in these athletes, which is hard to get your head around, if they have a pulse of 80, they're often significantly tachycardic. These people, typically, their resting pulses in the 50s. Rectal temperature is imperative, as is the ability to check sodium and blood sugar. Those are the two things that we, laboratory-wise, we need to be able to have. Now, when you put that all together, generally the collapse is benign. If they're conscious and alert, rectal temps below 40, systolic blood pressure comes up, heart rate goes down. When you lay them down and elevate, their sugar's in a normal range, sodium in a normal range, and you want them, typically, it's best to have lost, anywhere staying about the same or a couple percent optimally. And this woman here is exhibiting the universal sign of benign collapse called the cell phone sign. Means you need to go out of the medical tent. On the opposite hand, collapse is more serious when if the athlete is unconscious, their mental status is altered. Obviously, they have that and a rectal temp above 140. They're going in the dunk tank, most serious cause of collapse we see. They're going to die or have significant morbidity if we don't get them cooled quickly. The longer they stay above 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the more damage that's done. With those, the systolic blood pressure often drops, the heart rate goes up. Sugars that are mostly hypoglycemia we worry about, or the low sodium below 130, not so much hypernatremia. Significant weight loss, more than 10%, or any weight gain worries me for hyponatremia, that they're fluid overloaded. Now, I'll finally end on, this to me, this slide sort of sums up the risk of the will of these extreme endurance athletes, why they get themselves into trouble. And this is one of the great Ironman triathletes of all time, Natasha Bodman, in the 2003 Ironman. Take a look at her about 2 miles into the run. She's finished the swim, 2 or 3 miles into the run. Look she peels over to the side of the course. She throws up 4 or 5 times, wipes the barf off her mouth, and keeps running, and actually won the race. Now, that's astounding to me. How can you block that out? I mean, to me, the first time barf touches my lips, the race is over. But not these athletes. And I think Sir Roger Bannister said it best when he summed up these kind of athletes. The notion that courage and esprit de corps can somehow defeat the principles of physiology is not only wrong, it's dangerously wrong. And this was often what gets them into trouble, and AKA Tommy Simpson is the classic case of that. So let me just conclude with a few summarizing points. Key to match fluid and salt intake with loss, not only to avoid significant injury, but to optimize performance. And in my experience, flawed hydration plans with either under or over drinking leads to a predictable spectrum of problems, and often collapse associated with it, and a diminution in their performance. Proper assessment of the collapsed athlete, usually benign when they collapse after the finish line. Vitals are normal, they remain conscious. You need to be worried when they collapse before the finish line, unstable vital signs, and an alteration in their level of consciousness. Weight change is the best guide for managing this and directing treatment. And I'll end with just one last cause of collapse here. Happy to take any questions. So I guess I should probably stop my sharing here. Let's see.
Thank you, Bob. That was really, really amazing, and a lot of examples. And being in this field, there was a lot of things that I was not aware of. So, really, really
great.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Stavros. I appreciate it.
We have one question in the chat. Can you talk about rhabdomyolysis and how hydration affects this?
Yeah, that's a great one. Rhabdomyolysis and effective hydration. And rhabdo kind of runs concurrently with heat stroke, and we see this breakdown of muscle. But we also see, if you measure the creatine kinase in most of these athletes, they're going to be high. They're going to be up in the multiples of thousands. I've seen some, with 15, 20, 30,000 CK after a race, and they do fine. The worry is that the breakdown of muscle, the creatine kinase in the blood, can clog the kidney and cause kidney insufficiency. And I've been dealing with one of our soccer players who he was complaining about fatigue, and I happened to run a CK, and he was 1800, which wasn't a big deal, but he had some renal insufficiency from it. So we always are concerned with athletes who if it gets really high, and the dehydration, when you combine it with it increases the risk for kidney injury. So another reason that it's important to stay hydrated with rhabdo.
Well, I have a question for you about
Sure.
About drinking to thirst a little bit. Could drinking to thirst prevent hyponatremia potentially?
Certainly, yeah. If we tried to follow that strictly, and I think drinking to thirst is fine when you're Mia Hamm. You're sweating 700 cc's an hour, not a big deal. Drink to thirst. Probably don't even have to drink at all in a soccer game. But even in an endurance athlete, I think sort of drinking then. But if you're Adam Kennedy, you're losing 5 liters an hour. Um, I think the risks are greater from the dehydration related illnesses and certainly on your performance. You really need to be drinking on a schedule and you need to be starting early on. You can't wait 30 minutes until thirst kicks in and you're already behind 3 liters. So I think it depends on the type of sweater you are and how hard you're going. If you're in an extreme endurance event on a hot and humid day, you got to have a plan and you get yourself into trouble, serious trouble without it. The risks of the hyponatremia, I think that's also knowing your sweat rate and matching it is a better way to prevent hyponatremia than just drinking only drinking to thirst. Again, if you're a light sweater, I think drinking to thirst is fine, but there's no one size fits all.
We have a couple more questions, I think.
Taking into consideration that there can be so much time in between wake-up time and the time they enter the water for the swim portion of the race, how can you best plan one's hydration and nutrition?
That's great. That's great. I think that in the morning, I think the best way to sort of gauge it in the morning is I wake up and you look at your urine. You're likely to urinate that morning. If your urine already looks clear, then you're hydrated enough. You're not a camel. You're not going to hold on. Pre-hydrating is not going to do any good. And I have a feeling, I don't have data to back this up, but I have a feeling a lot of these athletes that are hyponatremic, they come in because I'll ask them about how did you drink before the race. I got to believe a lot of them are coming into the race already hyponatremic, that they've really tanked up on fluids. You got to be really cautious with that. So I think sort of gauging if you're having to pee a lot and the pee is just dilute, it's clear, then you don't need to keep hydrating before the race. And there are fluid stations all out on the course. So it's not like your last opportunity to drink is right before you get in the water or before you start in a marathon. So I think you got to be cautious with the pre-hydration.
You mentioned a solution for mitigating the effects of cramps. Was it a tablespoon of salt?
Yes, yeah. Teaspoon, tablespoon, somewhere in that, depending on how much salt you think you lose. Putting it into Gatorade or Powerade, whatever sports drink you like, mixing it in there, shaking it up. And the first sign of cramping, we keep these bottles in with our water bottles. And when an athlete's cramping, we give them the salty sports drink to drink right away. The sooner you start drinking it, the first sign, the twitching of a cramp, it can really mitigate cramping when you do it early on.
And the last question is, last marathon runner majors have been warmer than expected. Is an amateur runner completely protected with a good hydration strategy?
Yeah, no, as much as we'd like to believe that if we have the perfect hydration strategy, we'll never see heat stroke. We're not going to have all these other issues. That's just not the case because we have seen heat stroke occur in athletes who were, not very dehydrated. We weigh them. I'm trying to remember the woman who had the 108 in Kona 2 years ago. I want to go back and look at her, but I believe she was maybe 3% dehydrated, 4% dehydrated, not significantly dehydrated. So we have to be on the lookout for these. Clearly, I think it's much more common, but it's not like you can totally protect yourself by hydrating, staying hydrated. There's still a risk there. So we got to be on the lookout for all of those. But I definitely see that those who are dehydrated are more likely, but not always.
Okay, a couple more questions. I have run many ultras up to 100 miles, all here in the desert. Nutrition along with hydration are always a challenge depending on the conditions. Could you comment on the balance between nutrition and hydration?
Yeah, I think it's different for everyone, and the nutrition is tough. I think it's a trial and error and learning what works for you. And Chris Lee learned that, when they had him at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, had him run on the treadmill for like an hour and a half and then ride a bike for an hour and a half. And they asked him to bring in what he would normally eat during a session where he was going that hard for an hour and a half. And he brought in a ton of food. I mean, it was a lot more than you would expect. And they actually slimmed down how much food he was taking in, the calories he was taking in. It made a huge difference in his level of GI upset. And so I think in the same way, matching fluid, it's much easier because um, you can do it by the weight loss, and that's a great estimation. We just don't have that for the calories. So I think it's more trial and error, but I think it differs for each person. I don't think there's a one size fits all for how much you should eat, what types of things you can eat. Clearly, simpler, not too complex of carbs, the sugar and the water are the most important. So how you take those in and how much, you don't want it sitting in your gut, how easily digestible it is. That's something I think is learned by trial and error. But we see crazy things at Ironman in their special needs bag. They have a bag for the when they transition from the bike to the run. I've seen guys eating McDonald's hamburgers in their bags. I mean, it's some crazy stuff. One of the big ones now that a lot of them use is defizzed Coke. The mixture of the water and the sugar, the carbohydrate in regular Coke. There's several, and then the caffeine added to it. There's a bunch of them that really utilize that towards the end of the bike and on the run as their go-to beverage. So I think it's something you have to learn how much what your gut tolerates and what works best for you. Often caffeine later in the race is helpful.
What physiological mechanism explains the appearance of white salt residue on clothing after sweating?
Yeah, that's a great question. I got to believe it's just your sweat concentration. We know that some people are just really heavy sweaters, and again, it's just anecdotal, but I feel like the ones who come in with cake sweat on their butt when they come walking in the med tent, I'm thinking, oh, they could be hyponatremic, or they're often crampers. Again, I don't have a study to back that statement up, but it's what I've observed over 25 years of taking care of these athletes in the tent. That when I see that. Why some people are saltier sweaters than others. Why do some people sweat more, lose more fluid than others? I don't know if Stavros might comment on the mechanism around that. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but.
Yeah, the interesting thing with sodium is that your blood is so tightly regulated. So most people are between 135, 145. In the sweat, the electrolyte, especially sodium content, it could be anywhere from 10 millimole all the way to, I don't know, 80, 90, if you assume that you don't have cystic fibrosis by any means.
Right.
So if you're, as you mentioned, if you sweat little and if you're down towards the 10, 20, 30, you're probably okay. If you sweat a lot and you have high electrolyte content, and you cannot figure it out. I mean, those signs you see in your clothing, the stains, are probably a response of what is the concentration of electrolytes in your sweat. I have some really fascinating pictures of people during the Spartathlon race in Greece that I was involved with a few years ago, where people run for 162 miles nonstop from Athens to Sparta in Greece. And actually, if I can extend that to a question that I was thinking, I know you touched upon it in your presentation. You said that there are cases of people that they are both dehydrated and hyponatremic. And in that race, particularly in Spartathlon, that we have published a couple of papers actually with those runners, we found several people, like the longer that they vent, that you can have both of those together. So they're minus X% of their body weight, plus they have sodium content of 128.
Yes. So what I found, and I did a little study that I didn't publish really, but I presented at ACSM. I looked at all of the athletes we had that were hyponatremic and then their weight changes. And it was the more elite athletes, more common in men, more elite the athlete, the more likely you were to see them they'd lost weight, but were hyponatremic. Typically, the hyponatremia was not to the level where a lot of these, they were not as common to be down below 125, certainly. That usually, in my experience, to get down that low, you're usually over drinking and you've gained weight. But we do see it a lot in the more elite athletes. Probably of all the hyponatremics, probably about 25 to 30% were dehydrated. And they were mostly more elite athletes where they had lost significant sweat, but then partially replaced it with a hypotonic solution.
Awesome. So we'll stop here. Thank you again so much for the
pleasure.
presentation. It was really, really amazing.
Thank you so much.
And for the audience, hopefully we'll see you October the 2nd, Thursday this time, for Professor Larry Armstrong. Thank you, Bob. Bye-bye.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stavros.
Can you
Thanks.
mention the CEUs?
What's
Yes,
that?
the links for the CEUs are in the chat if you want CEUs for BOC, ACSM, or CDR. Please click the appropriate link and we will send you the, you have to fill out the evaluation and to get the continuing education unit. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.